It was just a simple trip, my son said after posting photos in Paris with his mother-in-law on Mother's Day. I had set aside $328,000 in a fund to gift him. That's when I decided to take 2 steps before leaving the country. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The buzzing wouldn't stop. 53 missed calls. 53. I stared at my phone screen, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I tried to process what I was seeing. The display showed call after call from numbers I didn't recognize. A few from my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and strangers who somehow had gotten my number. My heart was already racing before I even understood why. It was 8:15 in the morning on what should have been a quiet Monday after Mother's Day. I'd spent yesterday alone, as I had for the past 3 years, telling myself it was fine. Gregory was busy with his new family. Sarah needed him more. I understood. I always understood. But as I scrolled through the missed calls, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The first voicemail was from Mrs. Patterson next door. Margaret, honey, I saw the photos online. I'm so sorry, dear. Call me when you get this. Photos? What photos? My hand shook as I opened Facebook, something I rarely did anymore. The algorithm had become cruel over the years, showing me glimpses of a life I wasn't part of. But today it served up my worst nightmare on a silver platter. There they were. 27 photos of my son Gregory in Paris. Not just Paris, the most romantic, expensive Paris you could imagine. The Eiffel Tower at sunset, champagne at sidewalk cafes, designer shopping bags, 5-star restaurants. And in every single photo, nestled beside him and his wife Sarah, was her mother Linda. Linda with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer clothes. Linda, holding my grandson Tommy's hand as they fed ducks by the Seine. Linda raising a toast at what looked like Le Grand Vefour, a restaurant I'd only seen in movies. Linda, who had taken my place on Mother's Day. The caption under the main photo made my blood turn to ice. Perfect Mother's Day getaway with the most amazing mother-in-law. So grateful for family traditions. Love you, Mom Linda. Mom Linda. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. 53 people had called to make sure I'd seen it. 53 people felt sorry enough for me to reach out to the mother who'd been so publicly, so completely erased from her own son's life. I stumbled to my kitchen, my legs feeling like they might give out. The coffee maker sat cold and empty, just like everything else in this house. On my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like Texas, was a photo of Tommy from Christmas 2 years ago. The last time I'd seen him for more than a few minutes. The numbers started spinning in my head. Paris in May. First-class flights for 4 people, minimum $8,000. The hotel looked like the Plaza Athénée from the marble bathroom photo Sarah had posted. Another $6,000 for a week. The restaurants, the shopping, the private tour guide I glimpsed in the background of one shot. At least $30,000. Maybe more. I walked slowly to my bedroom, to the small safe hidden behind my wedding photo. Inside, along with my important papers, was the letter from my financial advisor. The one confirming that I'd moved exactly $328,000 into a special account. Gregory's surprise. The gift I'd been planning to give him on his 35th birthday next month. I'd been saving for 3 years, ever since he mentioned wanting to start his own consulting firm. Every extra dollar from my part-time job at the library. Every penny saved from clipping coupons and buying generic brands. I downsized from the family home to this tiny apartment to make it happen. I'd given up dinners out, new clothes, even my morning Starbucks habit. Also, my son could have his dream. And while I was pinching pennies to save for his future, he was spending more on a single vacation than I made in a year. With her mother. Not me. The phone rang again, making me jump. This time it was a number I recognized. My sister Beth in Colorado. Margaret? Oh, honey, please tell me you didn't see those photos. I saw them. My voice sounded hollow even to myself. I don't understand how he could do this to you. On Mother's Day of all days. I closed my eyes. Did you call him? I tried. Sarah answered. She said it was just a simple trip, and that you were probably overreacting. Margaret, they spent more on wine at one dinner than you spend on groceries in 2 months. Just a simple trip. I hung up without saying goodbye and sat on the edge of my bed, still holding the financial documents. $328,000. The money I'd scraped together while eating cereal for dinner and driving my 15-year-old Honda until the engine rattled. While Gregory and Sarah lived in their 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with their 2-car garage and weekly date nights. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. The worst part was the look on Tommy's face in those photos. He looked happy. Genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen when he was with me. Like Linda was already more of a grandmother to him than I'd ever been allowed to be. In one photo, he was sitting on her lap at a carousel, both of them laughing at something off camera. In another, she was helping him build a sandcastle at what looked like a private beach club. Real moments. The kind of moments I dreamed of having with my grandson but had never been offered. How long had this been planned? The photos weren't spontaneous snapshots. They were carefully curated, professionally composed. This had been organized for weeks, maybe months. While I was setting aside money for Gregory's future, he was planning a future that had no place for me in it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the Paris pics. So sorry, Margaret. You deserve better. Janet from book club. Then another. Thinking of you today. That was cruel. Your neighbor across the street. And another. My heart breaks for you. Susan from the library. 53 calls. 53 people who felt compelled to reach out because what my son had done was so obviously, so publicly heartless that strangers felt the need to comfort me. I looked around my small apartment, the one I'd moved to so I could afford to help Gregory. The furniture I'd kept from the divorce 20 years ago. The single photograph of Gregory at his college graduation. The last time he'd looked at me with anything resembling pride. When had I become so invisible? When had my love become something to be managed rather than cherished? When had I become the mother you called when you needed something, but never the mother you included when life got beautiful? The financial advisor's letter crinkled in my shaking hands. $328,000. I thought it would make Gregory happy. I thought it would show him how much I believed in him, how much I wanted his success. But looking at those photos, I realized something that cut deeper than any amount of money ever could. He didn't need me anymore. Maybe he never really had. It was just a simple trip, my son said after posting photos in Paris with his mother-in-law on Mother's Day. I had set aside $328,000 in a fund to gift him. That's when I decided to take 2 steps before leaving the country. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The buzzing wouldn't stop. 53 missed calls. 53. I stared at my phone screen, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I tried to process what I was seeing. The display showed call after call from numbers I didn't recognize. A few from my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and strangers who somehow had gotten my number. My heart was already racing before I even understood why. It was 8:15 in the morning on what should have been a quiet Monday after Mother's Day. I'd spent yesterday alone, as I had for the past 3 years, telling myself it was fine. Gregory was busy with his new family. Sarah needed him more. I understood. I always understood. But as I scrolled through the missed calls, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The first voicemail was from Mrs. Patterson next door. Margaret, honey, I saw the photos online. I'm so sorry, dear. Call me when you get this. Photos? What photos? My hand shook as I opened Facebook, something I rarely did anymore. The algorithm had become cruel over the years, showing me glimpses of a life I wasn't part of. But today it served up my worst nightmare on a silver platter. There they were. 27 photos of my son Gregory in Paris. Not just Paris, the most romantic, expensive Paris you could imagine. The Eiffel Tower at sunset, champagne at sidewalk cafes, designer shopping bags, 5-star restaurants. And in every single photo, nestled beside him and his wife Sarah, was her mother Linda. Linda with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer clothes. Linda holding my grandson Tommy's hand as they fed ducks by the Seine. Linda raising a toast at what looked like Le Grand Vefour, a restaurant I'd only seen in movies. Linda, who had taken my place on Mother's Day. The caption under the main photo made my blood turn to ice. Perfect Mother's Day getaway with the most amazing mother-in-law. So grateful for family traditions. Love you, Mom Linda. Mom Linda. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. 53 people had called to make sure I'd seen it. 53 people felt sorry enough for me to reach out to the mother who'd been so publicly, so completely erased from her own son's life. I stumbled to my kitchen, my legs feeling like they might give out. The coffee maker sat cold and empty, just like everything else in this house. On my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like Texas, was a photo of Tommy from Christmas 2 years ago. The last time I'd seen him for more than a few minutes. The numbers started spinning in my head. Paris in May. First-class flights for 4 people, minimum $8,000. The hotel looked like the Plaza Athénée from the marble bathroom photo Sarah had posted. Another $6,000 for a week. The restaurants, the shopping, the private tour guide I glimpsed in the background of one shot. At least $30,000. Maybe more. I walked slowly to my bedroom, to the small safe hidden behind my wedding photo. Inside, along with my important papers, was the letter from my financial advisor. The one confirming that I'd moved exactly $328,000 into a special account. Gregory's surprise. The gift I'd been planning to give him on his 35th birthday next month. I'd been saving for 3 years, ever since he mentioned wanting to start his own consulting firm. Every extra dollar from my part-time job at the library. Every penny saved from clipping coupons and buying generic brands. I downsized from the family home to this tiny apartment to make it happen. I'd given up dinners out, new clothes, even my morning Starbucks habit. Also, my son could have his dream. And while I was pinching pennies to save for his future, he was spending more on a single vacation than I made in a year. With her mother. Not me. The phone rang again, making me jump. This time it was a number I recognized. My sister Beth in Colorado. Margaret? Oh, honey, please tell me you didn't see those photos. I saw them. My voice sounded hollow even to myself. I don't understand how he could do this to you. On Mother's Day of all days. I closed my eyes. Did you call him? I tried. Sarah answered. She said it was just a simple trip, and that you were probably overreacting. Margaret, they spent more on wine at one dinner than you spend on groceries in 2 months. Just a simple trip. I hung up without saying goodbye and sat on the edge of my bed, still holding the financial documents. $328,000. The money I'd scraped together while eating cereal for dinner and driving my 15-year-old Honda until the engine rattled. While Gregory and Sarah lived in their 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with their 2-car garage and weekly date nights. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. The worst part was the look on Tommy's face in those photos. He looked happy. Genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen when he was with me. Like Linda was already more of a grandmother to him than I'd ever been allowed to be. In one photo, he was sitting on her lap at a carousel, both of them laughing at something off camera. In another, she was helping him build a sandcastle at what looked like a private beach club. Real moments. The kind of moments I dreamed of having with my grandson but had never been offered. How long had this been planned? The photos weren't spontaneous snapshots. They were carefully curated, professionally composed. This had been organized for weeks, maybe months. While I was setting aside money for Gregory's future, he was planning a future that had no place for me in it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the Paris pics. So sorry, Margaret. You deserve better. Janet from book club. Then another. Thinking of you today. That was cruel. Your neighbor across the street. And another. My heart breaks for you. Susan from the library. 53 calls. 53 people who felt compelled to reach out because what my son had done was so obviously, so publicly heartless that strangers felt the need to comfort me. I looked around my small apartment, the one I'd moved to so I could afford to help Gregory. The furniture I'd kept from the divorce 20 years ago. The single photograph of Gregory at his college graduation. The last time he'd looked at me with anything resembling pride. When had I become so invisible? When had my love become something to be managed rather than cherished? When had I become the mother you called when you needed something, but never the mother you included when life got beautiful? The financial advisor's letter crinkled in my shaking hands. $328,000. I thought it would make Gregory happy. I thought it would show him how much I believed in him, how much I wanted his success. But looking at those photos, I realized something that cut deeper than any amount of money ever could. He didn't need me anymore. Maybe he never really had. The knife twisted deeper. I made them for you, so I could help you start your business. And I appreciate that, but Mom, you can't use money as a way to control us. If you're having financial problems, maybe you should consider moving to one of those senior communities. They're really nice now, and I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely set the phone down. Senior communities. He wanted to put me away somewhere so I'd stop being an inconvenience to his new life. I looked around my small apartment again, seeing it through his eyes. The outdated furniture. The bargain basement decorations. The careful way I'd arranged my few nice things to hide how little I really had. I'd given him everything. My youth, my dreams, my financial security. I'd worked myself to the bone so he could have a better life. And now that better life had no room for me in it. But I still had one thing Gregory didn't know about. $328,000. And for the first time since I'd seen those photos, I started to think about what else I could do with that money. Something that had nothing to do with my son's dreams and everything to do with mine. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those Paris photos. My grandson's delighted face as Linda pushed him on a swing in some perfect Parisian park. The intimate family dinner where I should have been sitting but wasn't. The way Sarah looked at her mother with such obvious love and gratitude. The way Gregory used to look at me. By morning I'd made my decision. I was going to drive to their house and have this conversation face to face. No more phone calls where he could dismiss me with corporate speak about understanding and being reasonable. I needed to look my son in the eye and hear him explain how $30,000 on a vacation was just a simple trip, while his mother ate store-brand crackers for dinner to save money for his future. Their house was in one of those newer developments where every lawn looked like a golf course and every driveway had 2 cars that cost more than I made in 3 years. I'd been there exactly 4 times in the 2 years since they'd moved in. Never for a holiday. Never for a family dinner. Just awkward drop-by visits where I felt like I needed an appointment. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, gathering courage I didn't know I still had. Through their front window, I could see them moving around their kitchen. Gregory in his weekend clothes, Sarah in yoga pants that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Normal. Comfortable. Like they hadn't just publicly humiliated me in front of 53 people who felt sorry enough to call. When Gregory opened the door, his face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, guilt, then something that looked almost like annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing here? We need to talk." He glanced back toward the kitchen, where Sarah was pretending not to eavesdrop. "It's not really a good time. Tommy's napping and we have plans later." "Gregory." My voice was steadier than I felt. "Let me in." He stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into their pristine living room with its white furniture and expensive art. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. Nothing looked lived in or loved. Nothing looked like home. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her smile bright and fake. "Margaret, what a nice surprise. I was just telling Gregory we should call you soon. Were you planning to call me from Portugal? Or maybe Italy? I saw how much you enjoyed Paris." The smile flickered. "Oh, that. Gregory told you it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Mom's been going through such a hard time since Dad passed and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was spontaneous. I saw the photos, the private tour guide, the reservations at restaurants that book months in advance, the hotel suite that costs more per night than my monthly rent." Gregory sank into one of his white chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. "Mom, what do you want me to say? Yes, it was expensive. Yes, Linda paid for most of it. But that doesn't mean. It means you lied to me." The words came out harder than I'd intended. "You called it a simple trip while you were living like royalty on someone else's dime. Do you have any idea how that felt? Seeing those photos on Mother's Day." Sarah's fake sympathy was grating. "Margaret, I know this must be difficult, but you have to understand that Linda is going through a really tough time. She needed family support and—" "What about me?" The question exploded out of me. "What about my tough time? Do you think it's easy being alone every holiday? Do you think it's fun watching my grandson grow up through social media posts? Do you think I enjoy driving 3 hours to see you for an hour before you find an excuse to leave?" Gregory ran his hands through his hair. The same gesture he'd made as a boy when he was caught in a lie. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We see you plenty." "When?" Name the last time we spent more than 2 hours together. Silence. Christmas, Sarah offered weakly. We came for Christmas dinner. You came for 40 minutes on Christmas Day. You stayed long enough to eat and open presents, then left because Linda had made special plans. Gregory's jaw tightened. Look, I'm sorry you feel left out, but Sarah's right. Linda needed us. She's been severely depressed since her husband died. Taking her to Paris was therapeutic. Therapeutic. I repeated the word slowly. A $30,000 therapy session. While your mother clips coupons and shops at thrift stores so she can save money for your future. That got his attention. What do you mean save money for my future? For a moment I almost told him. Almost revealed the $328,000 I'd been squirreling away for 3 years. The money I'd been planning to surprise him with for his business dreams. But something in his expression stopped me cold. He looked annoyed. Not guilty, not grateful for my sacrifice. Annoyed that I was bringing up money. Nothing, I said quietly. Forget I said anything. Sarah jumped in, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd learned to hate. Margaret, I think maybe you're feeling a little jealous? Of my relationship with my mom? I know it must be hard, but Gregory and I have our own life now. Our own priorities. Jealous. The word hit me like a slap. You think I'm jealous? My voice was barely above a whisper. Well, I mean, you do tend to get upset when we spend time with my family. And I understand that, I really do. But Gregory can't be responsible for managing your emotions. You're a grown woman. Managing my emotions, like my heartbreak over being excluded from my son's life, was just another inconvenience for them to handle. Gregory was nodding along with his wife's assessment. Sarah's right, Mom. I love you, but you can't expect us to structure our entire lives around making sure you don't feel left out. I never asked you to structure your entire life around me, I said, my voice getting stronger. I asked you to include me sometimes. I asked you to remember that I exist when you're making family plans. I asked you to treat me like I'm actually related to you instead of like some distant acquaintance you have to be polite to. That's not fair, Gregory said. We invite you to things. When? When did you last invite me to something that mattered? Tommy's birthday parties where I sit in the corner while Linda holds court? Holiday dinners where I'm clearly the extra person at the table? Or maybe you mean those times you invite me to tag along, when you can't find a babysitter. Sarah's mask was slipping. Margaret, I think you're being a little unfair. We've always tried to include you when appropriate. When appropriate. The phrase hung in the air between us. When appropriate, I repeated. So it's appropriate for me to babysit when you want to go out, but not appropriate for me to join the family vacation. It's appropriate for me to bring homemade food to your parties, but not appropriate for me to sit at the main table. It's appropriate for me to drive 3 hours to see my grandson for an hour, but not appropriate for me to actually be part of his life. Gregory stood up abruptly. Okay, this is getting out of hand. Mom, I think you should go home and calm down. When you're ready to have a rational conversation. This is rational. I was standing now too, my voice echoing in their perfect living room. This is me finally being honest about how you've been treating me for 3 years. Ever since you married Sarah. I've been slowly erased from your life, and every time I try to talk about it, you tell me I'm being too sensitive or too demanding or too emotional. Sarah moved closer to Gregory, a united front against the crazy mother-in-law. Margaret, maybe you should consider that there's a reason you feel so isolated. Maybe it's not everyone else who's the problem. The cruelty of it took my breath away. She was suggesting that my own son's rejection was my fault, that I'd somehow earned this treatment. Gregory put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Look, Mom, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but Sarah has a point. You do tend to be a little clingy, and Linda is just easier to be around. She doesn't make everything about her. She doesn't keep track of how much time we spend with her versus other people. Clingy, easier to be around. I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the young man I'd sacrificed everything for. The father who was now teaching his child that grandmothers were disposable if they became inconvenient. I see, I said quietly. So Linda is easier because she pays for your vacations. She's easier because she never asks for anything because she doesn't need to. She's easier because she can afford to be generous instead of having to choose between new shoes and saving money for her son's dreams. That's not what I meant, Gregory said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's exactly what you meant. I picked up my purse from their spotless coffee table. I understand now. I'm too poor to be worth including. Too needy to be worth loving. Too ordinary to be worth your time. Mom, don't be ridiculous. I headed toward the door, then turned back one last time. Tell me something, Gregory. If I died tomorrow, would you miss me? Or would you just be relieved that you don't have to manage my emotions anymore? The question hung in their perfect house like smoke. Neither of them answered. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Sarah's voice behind me, quiet but not quiet enough. Finally, I thought she'd never leave. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. 3 years of doubting myself, of wondering if I was asking for too much, of making myself smaller and smaller to fit into their lives. But I wasn't too much. I wasn't clingy or difficult or inappropriate. I was just inconvenient. And in Gregory's new life, inconvenient things got discarded. I sat in my car in their driveway for 20 minutes after walking out, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Sarah's words echoed in my head. Finally, I thought she'd never leave. That's when I knew. This wasn't about hurt feelings or miscommunication. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a heartfelt conversation or better boundaries. They wanted me gone. They'd been waiting for me to disappear from their lives. And the only reason they hadn't cut me off completely was because it would look bad. I was the inconvenient mother they had to tolerate, not the cherished family member they chose to love. The drive home was a blur of suburban streets and strip malls, but my mind was crystal clear for the first time in years. I wasn't going home to cry or call my sister, or spend another sleepless night wondering what I'd done wrong. I was going home to take action. 2 actions specifically. 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I called my financial advisor. Margaret, good to hear from you, Robert said in his warm, professional voice. I assume you're calling about transferring Gregory's fund for his birthday next month? Actually, no. My voice was steadier than it had been all week. I want to close that account entirely. A pause. Close it? Margaret, we've talked about this gift for years. Are you sure you want to? I'm absolutely sure. I want every penny transferred back to my primary savings account. Today. Well, there might be some paperwork involved, and I'd strongly recommend you take some time to think about this decision. $328,000 is a significant amount to Robert. I interrupted him, something I'd never done in 15 years of working with him. I need this done today. Can you make that happen? Another pause, then his voice became more careful. Of course. I'll start the paperwork immediately. Margaret, is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said and meant it. Actually, I have one more request. I need information about purchasing property in Portugal. Portugal? He sounded genuinely surprised. For investment purposes? No. For living purposes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, something I rarely used except for checking email. But tonight I had research to do. Portugal had been calling to me for years, ever since I'd read an article about Americans retiring there. The cost of living, the healthcare system, the way they welcomed foreigners. I'd bookmarked websites and saved articles, telling myself it was just a daydream, something to think about when I was older, when Gregory didn't need me anymore. Well, Gregory didn't need me anymore. I spent 4 hours researching neighborhoods in Lisbon, Porto, and smaller coastal towns. I looked at real estate prices and was amazed to discover that my savings could buy me a beautiful apartment near the ocean, something I could never afford in the States. I researched visa requirements for retirees and found the process was surprisingly straightforward. By midnight, I had a plan. The second action was harder but necessary. I opened my laptop and began typing. Dear Gregory, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Not dead. Don't worry, you won't have to deal with that inconvenience for many years yet. Just gone from your life in the way you've clearly wanted for so long. I won't be calling on holidays anymore or dropping by unannounced. I won't be sending homemade gifts that embarrass you or asking to spend time with my grandson. I won't be managing my emotions in a way that burdens you or being clingy in a way that drives you away. I realize today that I've been fighting for a relationship that only existed in my memory. The son who used to hug me tight and tell me I was the best mom in the world. That boy grew up and decided his mother was too poor, too needy, too ordinary to be worth including in his beautiful life. I don't blame you for that. Not entirely. I blame myself for making it so easy. For 3 years I've been saving money for your business dream. $328,000 to be exact. Money I saved by eating generic food and shopping at thrift stores and working extra hours even though my back aches and my feet swell. I wanted to surprise you for your 35th birthday. But I've realized something important. You don't need my money and you don't want my love. You have Linda for family vacations and emotional support. You have Sarah to prioritize and protect. You have a life that works perfectly without me in it. So I'm giving you what you want. My absence. I've spent 60 years making myself smaller to fit into other people's lives. First your father who decided I wasn't worth staying for. Then you who decided I wasn't worth including. I'm done shrinking. I'm taking my $328,000 and buying myself a life where I don't have to apologize for existing. Where I don't have to earn love by being convenient. Where I can be as clingy or dramatic or inappropriate as I want because it's my life and my choice. Don't look for me. Don't call the police. Don't suddenly decide you miss me now that I'm not available to miss you back. I'm not running away. I'm running toward something. Something that has nothing to do with being your mother and everything to do with being myself. Take care of Tommy. I hope you teach him that grandmothers are people who deserve love, not just toleration. I hope you never make him feel like he has to choose between being loyal to you and being kind to someone who loves him. Goodbye, Gregory. I hope your life is everything you want it to be. Love always, Mom. P.S. The money I was saving for you is now funding my new life. Consider it a gift to both of us. I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to their house. I'd mail it after I left town. The next morning I called in sick to work. Then I drove to 3 different banks and closed all my accounts, consolidating everything into cashier's checks. I went to my landlord's office and gave notice on my apartment 30 days, which was all I needed. Then I went shopping. For the first time in 3 years I bought name brand groceries. I bought new clothes that actually fit instead of the 2 large thrift store finds I'd been settling for. I bought expensive coffee and fresh flowers and a bottle of wine that cost more than $20. I felt giddy, almost drunk on the novelty of spending money on myself without calculating how it would affect Gregory's fund. That afternoon, I called a real estate agent in Lisbon I'd found online. Her name was Carolina, and her English was better than my Portuguese. Yes, I have several properties that might interest you, she said after I explained what I was looking for. Are you planning to visit first? Or would you like to make arrangements remotely? I want to visit next week, I said, surprising myself with how definite I sounded. I want to see everything in person before I decide. Wonderful. I can arrange a tour of 5 or 6 properties, help you with temporary housing, perhaps show you around the neighborhoods. How long are you planning to stay? Permanently, I said. I'm not visiting. I'm moving. After I hung up, I sat in my small apartment and looked around with new eyes. The furniture I'd kept from my marriage, the kitchen table where Gregory had done his homework, the couch where we'd watched movies together when he was small. None of it mattered anymore. None of it was coming with me. I spent the evening making lists and phone calls. Passport expediting services. International shipping companies. Portuguese language apps for my phone. All the practical details of disappearing from one life and starting another. My sister Beth called while I was researching flights. Margaret, I've been thinking about what happened. Maybe you should try talking to Gregory again. Give him a chance to. I'm moving to Portugal, I said. Silence. Then? What? I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I've already found an apartment in Lisbon. Margaret, you can't be serious. You don't even speak Portuguese. I'll learn. But what about your job? Your apartment? Your whole life is here. My whole life was Gregory, I said quietly. And Gregory doesn't want my life. So I'm starting over. What about when he realizes what he's lost? What about when he wants you back in his life? I thought about that for a long moment. Then he'll learn what it feels like to miss someone who isn't available to miss you back. After I hung up with Beth, I opened my laptop and bought a plane ticket to Lisbon. One way, leaving in exactly 2 weeks. Then I opened a bottle of the expensive wine I'd bought and poured myself a glass. I sat on my balcony, watching the sun set over a city I'd lived in for 30 years, but had never really belonged to. For the first time since I'd seen those Paris photos, I smiled. In 2 weeks, I would be gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. I would stop being the mother who waited by the phone for calls that never came, the grandmother who cherished scraps of attention, the woman who made herself small enough to fit into the corners of other people's lives. I would become someone new. Someone who didn't apologize for taking up space. Someone who chose herself first. The wine was excellent. The plane descended through cotton-white clouds, and suddenly there it was, Lisbon spread out below me like a postcard come to life. Red-tiled roofs cascaded down 7 hills toward the gleaming Tagus River. And somewhere in that beautiful maze of narrow streets was my new home. I pressed my face to the airplane window like a child, my heart racing with something I hadn't felt in years. Pure excitement about my own future. The apartment Carolina had found for me was in Alfama, the oldest neighborhood in the city. 3 rooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had been standing since before America was even discovered. The stairs were steep and narrow, but when she opened the door to the small balcony, I gasped. The view stretched over the river to the far hills, and below us, the neighborhood hummed with life. Children played in the narrow street while their grandmothers watched from doorways. Laundry fluttered like flags between buildings. Somewhere someone was playing guitar. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. "The rent is very reasonable," Carolina said in her careful English. "And Senora Pereira downstairs, she speaks a little English. She can help you learn Portuguese." I signed the lease that afternoon and spent my first night in Lisbon on a mattress on the floor, eating takeout from a neighborhood Tosca and listening to the sounds of my new world through the open windows. Trams clattering over cobblestones. Conversations in rapid Portuguese. The distant sound of fado music floating from a restaurant down the hill. For the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep smiling. The first month was like waking up from a long gray dream. Every day brought something new to discover. I enrolled in Portuguese classes at a language school near Ratio Square, where my classmates were mostly young people from around the world. At 58, I was by far the oldest student, but nobody seemed to care. "Why did you choose Portugal?" asked Emma, a 20-something teacher from England, during our first coffee break. "Because I wanted to choose something for myself," I said, and realized it was the truest thing I'd said in years. Senora Pereira became my unofficial Portuguese grandmother, teaching me to shop at the market and warning me about which vendors tried to overcharge tourists. She was 73, a widow who'd raised 4 children in the same building where she still lived. "In Portugal," she told me in her mix of Portuguese and broken English, "we know how to appreciate life. Not just work, work, work like Americans. Life is for living." She was right. In my old life, I'd measured success by how much I could save, how much I could sacrifice, how little space I could take up. Here, success seemed to mean something different. It meant sitting in the cafe for 2 hours over 1 coffee, talking with neighbors. It meant taking time to watch the sunset from the Miradoro. It meant cooking a meal that took all afternoon, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. By the 2nd month, I was having basic conversations in Portuguese and had established routines that felt like home. Morning coffee at the corner cafe with João, who'd owned it for 30 years. Afternoon Portuguese lessons. Evening walks along the river. Weekend trips to explore other neighborhoods, other towns. I bought plants for my balcony and learned to make Portuguese pastéis de nata from Senora Pereira. I joined a book club that met monthly in English, attended free concerts in beautiful old churches, discovered that I actually enjoyed my own company when I wasn't spending all my time worrying about other people's feelings. My phone had been mostly silent since I'd arrived, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. A few messages from Beth, asking how I was settling in. Some work emails that I deleted without reading. Nothing from Gregory. That changed on a Tuesday morning in my 3rd month. I was having coffee on my balcony, practicing Portuguese verb conjugations, when my phone buzzed with an unknown international number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom." Gregory's voice was strained, almost frantic. "Mom, where are you?" I set down my coffee cup carefully, my heart immediately racing despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Hello, Gregory." "Jesus, Mom, we've been looking for you everywhere. Your landlord said you moved out, your job said you quit, nobody knows where you went. We thought something happened to you. Even when he was talking to me. I'm fine, I said simply. Where are you? I'll come get you. We can figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. I'm exactly where I want to be. A long pause. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just disappear because we had a fight. We can work through this. I looked out at the Tagus River, golden in the morning light, and felt that familiar tug of old habits. The urge to make him feel better, to minimize my own hurt, to smooth everything over so Gregory wouldn't be uncomfortable. Instead, I said, we didn't have a fight, Gregory. You made it very clear that I'm too clingy, too dramatic, and too inconvenient for your life. So I removed the inconvenience. That's not what I meant, and you know it. It's exactly what you meant. My voice was steady now, stronger than I'd expected. You wanted me to be easier to deal with like Linda. Well, now I'm the easiest possible to deal with. You don't have to deal with me at all. Mom, please. Just tell me where you are. The desperation in his voice should have melted me. 3 months ago it would have. But I'd learned something important in my new life. My son's discomfort was not my emergency. I'm happy, Gregory. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy. I hope you can be happy for me too. You're being selfish. The word hit me like a physical slap, but instead of hurting, it made me laugh. Actually laugh. Yes, I said. I suppose I am. I'm being incredibly, wonderfully selfish. I'm choosing myself first, the way you taught me to. That's not fair. Fair. I stood up and walked to my balcony railing, looking down at the narrow street where Senora Pereira was hanging laundry and chatting with her neighbor. Was it fair when you spent $30,000 on a vacation with Sarah's mother, but couldn't spare 2 hours for lunch with me? Was it fair when you told me I was too clingy for wanting to be included in my grandson's life? Silence on the other end. I did get your letter, he said finally, his voice smaller now. About the money you were saving. Good. Mom, I had no idea you were struggling like that. If I'd known. You did know. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. You knew I lived in a tiny apartment and shopped at thrift stores and drove a 15-year-old car. You knew I worked part-time at the library for minimum wage. You just didn't care because it wasn't your problem. Another long silence. Where are you? He asked again, but this time his voice was different. Smaller. Almost like the little boy who used to ask me to check for monsters under his bed. I almost told him. Almost gave him my address, almost invited him to visit, almost fell back into the old pattern of managing his emotions and making him feel better about hurting me. Instead, I said, I'm somewhere beautiful. Somewhere I can be as clingy or dramatic as I want without anyone telling me I'm too much. Mom. Take care, Gregory. Give Tommy my love. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. From something that felt like power. For the first time in our relationship, I had been the one to end the conversation. I had been the one to walk away. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. Mom, I'm sorry. Please call me back. Please. I read it, then deleted it without responding. That evening, I met my book club friends at a wine bar in Barro Alto. There was Maria, a retired teacher from Germany, James, a writer from Australia, and Carmen, a Spanish woman who'd moved to Lisbon after her divorce. We'd become close over the past few months, bonding over being foreigners starting over in a new country. You look different tonight, Carmen observed as we settled at our usual table. Lighter somehow. My son called today, I said, surprising myself by bringing it up. I hadn't talked much about Gregory with my new friends. Ah, said Maria, nodding knowingly. And how did that make you feel? Powerful, I said, then laughed at my own honesty. Is that terrible? Not at all, said James. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who make us feel smallest. It sounds like you found your size again. Found my size. I like that. We talked until late into the evening, switching between English and Portuguese and Spanish as the wine flowed. When I finally climbed the steep stairs to my apartment, I felt full in a way I hadn't in years. Not from the food or the wine, but from friendship. From belonging somewhere not because I was useful but because I was wanted. I sat on my balcony in the cool night air, looking out at the lights scattered across the hills of Lisbon. Somewhere across the ocean, Gregory was probably lying awake wondering where I was, maybe even missing me. The thought didn't hurt the way it used to. If he missed me now, it was because I was gone, not because I was present and inconvenient. It was the kind of missing that came from loss, not irritation. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without wondering if my son would call tomorrow. Without hoping he'd remember my birthday or invite me for a holiday, or include me in something important. I fell asleep wondering what new corner of Lisbon I'd explore. What new Portuguese phrase I'd learn, what new friend I might make. I fell asleep choosing myself. 8 months after I disappeared from Gregory's life, I was fluent enough in Portuguese to dream in the language. I could argue with vendors at the market, joke with my neighbors, and even cry at the more emotional fado performances without needing subtitles. I had become Portuguese in ways that went deeper than language. I'd learned to take 2-hour lunches without guilt, to buy flowers for my apartment just because they were beautiful, to say no to things that didn't bring me joy. I'd learned the revolutionary concept that my time belonged to me. The call came on a Thursday morning, while I was having coffee with Senhora Pereira on her balcony. We did this most mornings now. She taught me Portuguese, and I taught her English, though mostly we just enjoyed each other's company in the comfortable way of women who'd lived long enough to know that friendship didn't require constant conversation. My phone rang with that familiar international number. I'd been getting calls from Gregory every few weeks, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, always desperate to locate me. I'd stopped answering after the third one. This time, though, something made me pick up. Margaret. The voice wasn't Gregory's. It was Sarah's, and she sounded shaken. Margaret, please don't hang up. I almost did anyway. Instead, I gestured to Senhora Pereira that I needed privacy and stepped inside her tiny kitchen. What do you want, Sarah? We need to talk. Gregory and we're having problems. Financial problems. I said nothing, just waited. The consulting firm he wanted to start, he took out loans. Significant loans. He was counting on. He thought you were going to help him with the startup costs. The $328,000. Of course. And my voice was cooler than the Atlantic wind that swept up from the river. The business isn't working out the way he planned. The loans are due and we can't. Margaret, we might lose the house. I found myself oddly unmoved by this information. The Margaret of 8 months ago would have already been mentally calculating how to help, what I could sacrifice, what loans I could take out myself to save them. This Margaret just sipped her coffee and waited for Sarah to get to the point. We need you to come home, Sarah continued, her voice cracking. Gregory won't admit it, but he's falling apart. He hasn't slept in weeks. He keeps saying he made a mistake, that he never should have let you leave. He didn't let me leave, I said calmly. I chose to leave. Margaret, please. I know I wasn't always kind to you. But Tommy asks about his grandmother every day. He misses you. The mention of Tommy tugged at something deep in my chest, but I'd learned to examine my emotions before acting on them. Did Tommy really miss me? Or was that what Sarah hoped would manipulate me into coming back? Where's Gregory? I asked. He's too proud to call you himself. He knows he was wrong, but he can't bring himself to say it. You know how he is. I did know how he was. I'd spent 35 years making excuses for how he was, protecting him from the consequences of his own choices, smoothing over his mistakes so he never had to fully face them. Sarah, I said, my voice gentle but firm, why are you calling me instead of Linda? Surely she can help with your financial problems. The pause told me everything I needed to know. Linda's situation has changed. Her investments haven't done well. And with the economy. Sarah's voice trailed off. So Linda, the easier grandmother, the one with resources and no inconvenient needs, could no longer fund their lifestyle. And suddenly they remembered Margaret, the backup plan they'd kept in reserve. I see, I said. So when Linda could pay for Paris vacations, she was family. But now that she can't solve your problems, you need the clingy, dramatic mother-in-law you've been trying to get rid of. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. I walked to Senhora Pereira's window and looked down at the narrow street where children were playing football, their laughter echoing off the old stone walls. Tell me, Sarah, in the 8 months I've been gone, how many times has Gregory called just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for something or to locate me, but just because he missed talking to his mother. Silence. That's what I thought. Margaret, he does miss you. We both do. The house feels empty without you visiting. Tommy keeps asking when Grandma Margaret is coming back. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the pull of that old life for a moment. The familiar weight of being needed, even if it was only when there was a crisis to solve. The bittersweet comfort of being the person everyone turned to when things fell apart. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the life I'd built here. Senora Pereira was back on her balcony, reading her morning paper in the sunshine. Down the street, João was setting up tables outside his cafe, getting ready for the lunch crowd. Maria from my book club was walking up the hill with groceries, and she waved when she saw me in the window. This was home now. These people cared about me not because I could solve their problems, but because I brought something valuable to their lives just by being myself. Sarah, I said, I want you to give Gregory a message for me. Yes, anything. Tell him I got his 53 missed calls. Every single one of them. What? 8 months ago, 53 people called me because they saw his Paris photos and felt sorry for me. They called because what he did was so obviously cruel that strangers felt compelled to reach out. Now he's made 53 calls to me, begging me to come back and save him from the consequences of his choices. I could hear Sarah breathing on the other end, but she didn't speak. Tell him the irony isn't lost on me, I continued. Tell him I understand now what it feels like to be the one everyone wants to reach, and what it feels like to be the one who gets to decide whether to answer. Margaret, please. I'm not coming back, Sarah. Not to save the house, not to fix Gregory's business, not to be the convenient grandmother when Linda can't afford to be the fun one anymore. But we're family. The word hung between us like a question. Family. The word they'd used to exclude me from Paris, to justify putting Linda first, to explain why my feelings didn't matter as much as theirs. Yes, I said quietly. We are family. And family means Gregory will always be my son, and Tommy will always be my grandson. But it also means I will always be the woman you called clingy and dramatic. It means I will always be the mother-in-law you wished would just disappear. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage for what I needed to say next. I did disappear, Sarah. And I discovered something wonderful. I like who I am when I'm not trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I like who I am when I'm not apologizing for existing. So you're just going to abandon us? Abandon Tommy. The accusation should have stung, but it bounced off me like rain on a good umbrella. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing myself for the first time in my adult life. There's a difference. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that might have moved me once upon a time. If Gregory wants to talk to me, I said, really talk to me, not to ask for money or beg me to come fix his problems, he can call me himself. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman who left 8 months ago. I'm not desperate for his approval anymore. I'm not grateful for scraps of attention. I'm not willing to make myself smaller so others can feel bigger. What does that mean? It means if Gregory wants a relationship with me, it will be on equal terms. Not as the mother he tolerates, but as the person he respects. Not as the bank he withdraws from, but as the woman he genuinely wants in his life. And if he can't do that? I looked out at my beautiful neighborhood, at the life I'd built from scratch in a country where no one knew my history of making myself convenient for other people's comfort. Then he'll have to learn what it really feels like to miss someone who isn't coming back. After I hung up, I sat in Senora Pereira's kitchen for a long time, processing what had just happened. She appeared with fresh coffee and a plate of her homemade broa, settling across from me with the patient understanding of a woman who'd lived through her own share of difficult family choices. Difficult conversation? She asked in Portuguese. My son, I replied in the same language. He needs money. She nodded knowingly. Children sometimes forget that parents are people too. Not just, how do you say, recursos, resources. The word hit me with startling accuracy. Yes, I said. I was a resource, not a person. And now, I looked around her tiny kitchen with its mismatched chairs and hand-painted tiles, then out the window at the narrow street where life moved at a pace that honored both urgency and rest. I thought about my afternoon Portuguese lesson, my evening walk along the river, my plans to visit Porto next weekend with Maria and Carmen. Now I'm a person first, I said. A resource never. Senora Pereira patted my hand with her weathered fingers. Good, she said. About time. That evening I sat on my own balcony with a glass of Vinho Verde, watching the sunset paint the river gold and pink. My phone was silent. Gregory hadn't called back, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he'd understood my message. But for the first time since leaving, the silence didn't feel empty. Felt full of possibility. Tomorrow I would wake up in a life I'd chosen. I would drink coffee with friends who saw me as a complete person, not a convenience. I would walk through streets where no one expected me to be anything other than myself. I would continue building a life that belonged entirely to me. Gregory had taught me an invaluable lesson, though I doubted he'd intended to. He'd shown me that love without respect is just need wearing a prettier name. He'd shown me that being family doesn't give people the right to treat you as less than human. He'd shown me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is your absence, especially if they've taken your presence for granted. Most importantly, he'd shown me that I could survive without his love, and more than survive, I could thrive. The lights of Lisbon began twinkling in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the first notes of fado music drifting from a restaurant down the hill. The sound no longer made me sad the way it had when I first arrived. Now it sounded like freedom. I raised my glass to the city that had taught me how to choose myself, and for the first time in 58 years, I toasted to a future that was entirely my own.